Well, I have to say, the Hot Toys Ahsoka Captain Rex has to be one of the weirdest purchases that I have made in recent times, especially from Hot Toys. Hey everyone, it's Rustabout Collector here, and today we're taking a look at the Star Wars Hot Toys Captain Rex figure, Phase 1 and 2 from the Ahsoka TV series. This figure is interesting. It is a live-action representation of Captain Rex, and of course it is a actual prop. Unlike the previous clone troopers in Revenge of the Sith that were all CGI, this is one of the rare instances where we have live-action armor on an actor. We got this for Andor, we got this for The Mandalorian or Book of Boba Fett, I can't remember which one, maybe both, and then we also got it for Ahsoka. Surprisingly, this is the second Hot Toys figure based on live-action armor, and it's kind of fun to have those represented in the collection because we all grew up with clone troopers, but we never grew up with live-action clone troopers. They were all CGI or animated in the Clone Wars. This is a cool representation in the collection of a live-action actor in clone armor like we all dreamed about being. The box art is very, very nice. We have the Phase 2 Captain Rex and Phase 1 Captain Rex both represented. You can pop this right off, and then you're presented with this really cool picture of Captain Rex. This is basically like the set photos of the armor. We have the land between lands, or whatever this is, from Ahsoka as the background. Really nice picture here. Very, very nice portrait of the figure. And beneath that, all of this. All the accessories, all the extra bits. And I'm going to give away a little bit of the excitement for this figure already. He can do the pose. This is definitely one of the more posable bodies underneath all this armor that Hot Toys has used. You can see how well that elbow crunch actually comes up, and he can hold his DC-17 pistols in that Clone Wars render style. You can probably already tell, though, that this figure is interesting. There is a lot going on here in terms of armor detail and all of that that just looks curious. Curious for live action, curious for animated, curious for all sorts of reasons. Now, of course, the biggest thing is that this figure is horribly inaccurate. It's horribly inaccurate. So really quick, let's just do a quick cutaway. I'll correct this. We'll get this figure accurate in a second. There we go. Yeah, that's so much better. Perfect. Yeah, oddly enough, this figure, in some of the promo images, they had Captain Rex with his bicep armor and elbow armor completely backwards, to the point where, like, I'm sure the actor could not even bend his elbows. And then in the show itself, they were still like that, like off to the side. It was just so ridiculous that they ever allowed that to get through production. But anyways, that's just a little running gag with this armor. Unfortunately, despite it being really cool, it also has a lot of issues in terms of design consistency, design language, and again, elbows being rotated in the show, which essentially makes it canonical that Captain Rex was running around with really goofy elbow armor. So let's start off with the basics though. What does this figure come with? Of course, it's got the helmet for Phase 2, the pauldron with the pouch, two very large DC-17 blasters that are very odd looking. They're much more greebly and detailed than a standard Clone Wars model, and they're also much larger, which results in these very oversized, almost comically oversized holsters. He does have a wired camo, which is a first feature for clone troopers. I love that this is included. It's just a really nice detail and makes a lot of posing possibilities available for just the collector to have this guy posed in a more epic style. You can move the legs out and have him in a more dynamic pose, or just make it look like a really cool breeze is blowing and now he's, you know, dramatically posing with the blowing camo. He, of course, comes with this figure stand with the nice Captain Rex emblazoned there. Also, this sand base is much darker, and it's not just a standard reuse of like the Sand Trooper Commander Cody base. So this is a nice, more unique base to have for the figure. Now, out of the box, he is in the Phase 2 configuration, so we're going to start talking there, but we're going to go over all of his accessories really quick and then go over the Phase 2 and then Phase 1 iterations of his armor. He comes with a lone thermal detonator, as well as a very nice assortment of hands. You, of course, have hands with the hash marks for his Phase 2 armor, and then hands without that are for his Phase 1 armor. There's a pretty wide assortment here, and you're basically getting one of each. So like a Phase 1 and Phase 2 trigger finger, a Phase 1 and Phase 2 like open gesturing hand like this, and then other gripping hands and such. So you're getting one of each armor pattern, which is really nice so that you can display the figure in any pose, in any armor configuration. He also includes one of these live-action DC-15 carbines, which I absolutely hate. I don't know why they decided to change the look of the DC-15 carbine just for the live action armor. Of course, this is what we're used to seeing with like more of a Clone Wars, Revenge of the Sith style, and this is what we got in live action. It's really weird that they changed up so much of this blaster, but for the sake of argument, you could always say that maybe this is a specific variant of the DC-15 carbine. I just don't like the look of this, and I probably won't display him with this. And then for the Phase 1 configuration, you're given 2 shins, 2 arms here that are all in a more clean pattern that allows you to swap those out without the hash marks for Phase 1. You get a clean Phase 1 torso with a magnetic pauldron that can come off. So really this could also be used as a white clone trooper armor, but that actually hinges open, and so it makes a very nice transition of putting that armor on and off. Then you just slap that back on, or rather like that, and there's the pauldron. And then we get a live action Phase 1 helmet. This is different than the standard release Phase 1 helmet that they've given us with other clone troopers, because this one is of course based on the prop helmet, the physical prop helmet, which is honestly a little bit more like the Attack of the Clones clone trooper maquette statue that was used during pre-production. This is not like the CGI model, so it does have some proportional differences. But the paintwork and detail here is really, really nice. We'll take a closer look at that and all of its little details and functions when we swap the armor over. Now, starting with this Phase 2 armor, there's a lot to like here, there's a lot to not so like here, and not all of it is related specifically to this Hot Toys figure. I think that this is one of the better body molds that they've used for Captain Rex. Like I said, those elbows are really nicely articulated. It does use a more padded undersuit for the legs, so the articulation is a little bit more restricted there. But ultimately, this does look like a man in a suit. It doesn't look as sleek and slim as some of the other figures, and I think that that's correct. It should look like that because it is modeled after a real person in a real suit of armor. But there's a bit of a significant issue that I have with this overall character design, straight from Ahsoka. My problem with it is that this weirdly canonizes Clone Wars attachments and gear for clone troopers. The idea with the Clone Wars is that it should be animated and it should be stylized, and then of course you can translate it one-to-one with Revenge of the Sith style armor gear. So you see in the opening of Season 7 a montage where they show Aayla Secura and Commander Bly walking on Felucia, and it's clearly a copy of Revenge of the Sith, you can see, but they have the Clone Wars pauldrons, which implies that the Kama and the pauldron that we see in Clone Wars is just a stylized version of what we see in Revenge of the Sith. Well, Ahsoka kind of breaks that, because now we have a stylized pauldron and Kama on a realistic interpretation, and once it's on screen in a show like Ahsoka, it's technically canon, which makes this armor, this interpretation of animated style brought into a realistic format, canon, even though it clearly should be more like the Revenge of the Sith armor. So that has been my gripe with this armor since I saw it on screen. I do really, really like this armor, and I'm glad that we got to see Captain Rex in realistic style, but I just think that they lost their design language when they did this. I'm not sure why, I'm not sure how, but it was a choice that happened, and it's a bit of a bummer because now canon is really weird and messy, and like there's no consistency with all of that. But I digress. That's my issue with the overall design. The fact that Hot Toys just copied what they did in Ahsoka is not an issue here. After talking with Cobalt over on Instagram, they were helping me figure out some of the different details that are correct and incorrect with this figure. Thank goodness for the clone group chat, because they help me all the time with details about figures, and we kind of geek out about different little details in shows and renders and all of that stuff. And so yes, I kind of do get obsessed with some details about clone troopers, and sometimes the lack thereof of details with clone troopers. But overall, I look past a lot of things like that if it means a good figure, and I think that this is a pretty decent example of Captain Rex. First and foremost, I have to say, I think the biggest compliment I can give this figure is that this helmet is one of the most beautiful renditions of a accurate Revenge of the Sith style Captain Rex I have ever seen. The detailing, the weathering, the sculpting is all exceptional here. Has the little flip down visor, or rather antenna. This is a really excellent helmet sculpt. I do love this so, so much. The rest of the armor is nice. Of course, it is in that realistic stylization that they did for the show. So unlike what we've seen in Revenge of the Sith, there are pretty significant differences in shaping and sculpting of things like the elbow pads and forearms, and even down to the shape of the armor on the hand. It's just one of those weird things that I don't fully understand why they would change it for the live action, but they did, and that's what's canon now, and that's what we got. There's also areas like here on the arm where there's a little bit of a lip, and that's just representing where this armor actually folded and like had a seam where it went around the actor's arm. So those are also interesting details that you're not going to get with a Revenge of the Sith accurate CGI clone trooper. You also have this really ridiculously oversized ammo pouch on his chest here. This is the size of the pouch we got with the previous Captain Rex, and I can say I honestly much prefer this smaller size. Same goes for these holsters. These are just ridiculously oversized. I think it's kind of silly that this is what they went with, but it's what we got. The cama is another highlight for this figure though. The helmet and the cama I think are my two favorite details for this figure. The wiring is just so much fun to pose with, and you can make some really cool dynamic poses there. The rest of the armor is pretty accurate. We have more live action shins and feet here, although I think that these are actually from the FBX armor that would have been seen in Book of Boba Fett. And of course, just like with all Hot Toys, the weathering, the paint apps, those are all really nice and crisp. I especially love the details here with the welding where it has multiple different layers of bronzy color with silver and just really, really nice details going on there. And here he is next to his previous version, the Clone Wars style Captain Rex. You can see the differences in paint deco, helmet, weathering, even the pauldron. This one honestly feels a little bit closer to Sideshow in terms of the weathering and some of the different choices that they made with the figure. And this one definitely feels like a modern Hot Toys figure. But I think both can serve a really nice purpose in the collection. You could either have both in two different displays, this one being a live action display, this one being a Clone Wars display. This version certainly matches the other Clone Wars 501st clones much better in terms of body style, armor style, and coloration, whereas this one matches more, again, just the live action style, a little bit more Revenge of the Sith friendly with the helmet, and overall just a different aesthetic. Now, unfortunately, we don't have a live-action 501st Clone Trooper from the Ahsoka series, at least not yet. Maybe that will come down the line at some point. But we do have the Book of Boba Fett live-action 501st, and I think that these two actually go pretty nice side by side. The lighter blue on this 501st is accurate to Revenge of the Sith, and Captain Rex has always had a darker blue coloration in comparison to his troopers, so honestly, this works out pretty well. They're both going to have more of a bulky bodysuit, giving them that look of being a real person in real armor. And honestly, this is my favorite version of the 501st Clone Troopers. I have 4 of these compared to the other previous like Clone Wars style ones. I love these ones. Both are technically live action armor, so that's kind of a fun little detail to have there. Probably the most significant difference you're going to see here is that these guys are really glossy and Captain Rex is much more of a satin finish. If that's an issue, it's an issue. I mean, I guess if you really want to customize a high dollar figure, you could always hit this guy with a matte finish or a clear coat of some kind just to knock that shine down a little bit. But side by side, these two look really nice together. And I personally think that my shelf will share these two next to each other. They just look so, so nice. Now for the switch up to phase 1, you're just going to pop the hands off, remove the forearm armor here, pop the head off, take off that pauldron, swap the chest plate out with just popping those off there and pulling it forward. There is some Velcro inside just to keep it into position, and a little bit of swapping around later, and you have this phase 1 style Captain Rex. Really, the major differences are just the forearms, pauldron, chest plate, helmet, and lower legs. And you can kind of see that the weathering is definitely lighter on these pieces that you swap in, which does mean that the pieces you don't swap out, like the thighs, codpiece, and upper arms, also have to be kind of lightly weathered to match both versions kind of meeting in the middle. And so you will see like these lower legs here are just much more weathered than the phase 1 style, and that makes them stand out a little bit more against those upper thighs. But yeah, this is a pretty cool version of Captain Rex. I do like this live action phase 1 helmet. I do really wish now that we had troopers to go along with it in the same armor style. Maybe now that we have this version, if it sells well, maybe Hot Toys will just release that. Now, something interesting to note here is that we have actually gotten a version of phase 1 Captain Rex before in this scale, but it was from Sideshow, and this is my copy of that figure. I have him kind of in a crouched Fordo position here with his hand up, but you can see here they actually used a Revenge of the Sith style pauldron for him, which I really, really love on this figure. His cama is still animated, but that pauldron is what we should be seeing with a live action Captain Rex. This is the pauldron that I'm talking about when I say these are not accurate, but now they're canon, and I just don't know how to feel about that because these are animated, they're stylized. but they're stylized versions of this pauldron here. Personally, in my collection, I think I will be keeping this guy in the Phase 2 configuration, or possibly doing some kit bashing, which I'll get into, but I'm going to keep that Sideshow Captain Rex as my Phase 1 Captain Rex on the shelf, and this one will just exist as something different, something more unique in the collection. But ultimately, this is pretty nice. It looks pretty good, pretty accurate to the show. There are probably some discrepancies between the show and this, as with any figure. It's not going to be 100% accurate, but it's going to be pretty darn close to what we saw on screen. So if you're a fan of the Ahsoka show or just need a fairly decent version of Captain Rex in your collection, I do recommend this figure. It needs some work, it needs maybe some 3D printed parts, it needs a smaller ammo pouch here, but ultimately it's not that bad. My plan, however, is one that might be a little bit sacrilegious to some of you, and that is to say, kit bashing. Mixing and matching parts from two pretty decent Captain Rexes to make a perfect Captain Rex. I'm not sure how I will go about this. I don't really have a full plan yet, but ultimately looking at these two side by side, I see a lot of things I like between the two of them. I like the coloration of blue on this figure, I like the pauldron on this figure, I like the holsters certainly on this Clone Wars version compared to these large ones here, and even the DC-17s I prefer on this older figure. The wired cama is definitely a nice feature that I want to carry over from this figure, and so yeah, it might not be the best idea to be customizing very expensive figures, but looking at these two figures side by side, there's just so much that I want between the two of them combined into what I would consider like the perfect Captain Rex. In fact, I'm actually just curious now if I could do, if you maybe have one of these laying around and you just want a very simple, straightforward custom, that right there doesn't look all that bad. The coloration is a little bit off, but on camera and in person, it does work well enough. Like if this was on a shelf just standing as is, that's not that bad. The only thing that I really notice is that this is a much more muted dark blue, and of course his helmet is a much brighter color of blue. There is something here that could work really well if you wanted to have a custom Captain Rex, but with a more Revenge of the Sith accurate helmet. So that is what I plan to mess around with this figure. I like it as a live action version of Captain Rex, but there's just too much potential here to have more of what I would consider a perfect Captain Rex. But that's just my plans for now. I don't know when I'll get around to actually doing that. For now, this will be staying as the Ahsoka Captain Rex in my collection, and I do like it for what it is. I think this is a very solid version of the figure. If you maybe prefer this one to the older version, I think there's a lot to like with it, especially again in the articulation for the figure, in all of the accessories. You're getting 2 sets of armor, so if you get bored with Phase 2, swap it out for a Phase 1 for a little bit. For a month or two, you've got Phase 1 on your shelf instead of Phase 2. I think that's a really nice feature, and I do wish that we got that more with Clone Troopers, but it's not always possible because Phase 1 and Phase 2 often are very drastically different between iterations of the Clone Troopers. Yeah, for what it is, I'm really pleased with this. I think it got a lot right. It got some stuff inaccurate between the actual live action show and this figure, but unless you're looking at it under a microscope, this pretty much is just, here's the screen with Ahsoka, and they basically just popped that right off the screen and made it into a figure. So for what it's worth, this is a fun, quirky, really inaccurate to Revenge of the Sith, but pretty accurate to Ahsoka Captain Rex. And I know that that's really nitpicky at times, and some people will just be like, well, why do you care about those details? But I do. I like some consistency with my sci-fi space troopers, and yeah, unfortunately we don't get a lot of that with Clone Troopers, but it's still fun to collect different variants, and I do like that we finally have live-action Clone Troopers. The fun thing with this figure, though, if I keep it exactly as is, I don't kit bash it, this is a representation of one of the first iterations of live-action Clone Trooper armor, and I can display it really nicely with other iterations of live-action armor that I also really love and appreciate in my collection. So let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Do you already have the old one and don't feel the need to get this one? Or is this going to be your first pickup? Do you hate it? Do you love it? I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. As always, like and subscribe if you're new to the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful evening, noon, or night, depending on when you're watching this video. And as always, I'll be sure to catch you all in the next one.